Welcome. Good afternoon. Lovely to see you. It's so exciting to be able to talk about this project at last. As you probably know, we've been working on these plans for about 18 months now. Still very much work in progress, but the idea of this design festival is to share the story so far, to share the thoughts and ideas and theories and proposals and conundrums and questions and problems and challenges and inconsistencies that are real when you want to do something like this, which is very different. And so for those who come here wanting to know exactly what it's all going to look like and exactly what the final plans are, you're going to be disappointed because this is work in progress. But I hope that all the individuals and groups who've come along are going to lean into this process because we're going to need your help and your ideas and input along the way. We have in here a program of talks for the rest of the day and tomorrow, which are an opportunity for us to explore in a little bit more detail some of both the ideas and principles behind the project and how they're manifesting in the evolving plans. And also, hopefully, I'll give ourselves enough time for a bit of a discussion around that. But the idea is very much that this whole 3 days is a discussion. So everything that I talk about now, and also that my colleagues talk about in the other talks, is kind of in more detail in the exhibition. So if you haven't had a chance to wander around there yet, please do. We're working with a fantastic collection of 9 different architectural practices, engineers, travel planners, green energy specialists, flood specialists, and so on, who are all there to answer your questions and get your input and your ideas. So I hope you'll have time to do that. And then, of course, we've got some music and food and drink, because sustainable living should be a pleasure. And that's what we want to give ourselves a sense of as well. So anyway, I'm going to talk for the next half hour or so about healthy and sustainable living, specifically here at the Phoenix, and some of the journey to how we got to some of the ideas that we're looking at today, and also a few examples of how those principles are becoming manifest in the plan. And forgive me, I was doing the slides like 2 minutes ago, so they're not anywhere near as beautiful as I'd like. Sustainability, you could argue, is a bit like teenage sex. Everyone says they're doing it. They're probably not. And those who are almost certainly aren't doing it properly. But joking apart, it's an issue which, even in the last 18 months, it's extraordinary how much this topic has come up everyone's agenda. And I think that one of the challenges is that sustainability and the environmental crisis that we're facing can seem very distant, very abstract, very big, very intangible, and other. And the American essayist Wendell Berry captured the reality quite nicely, I think, when he said, we must learn to see that every problem that concerns us as conservationists always leads straight to the question of how we live. So these aren't actually big issues or challenges that have been put upon us by someone else. Of course there are politics involved, of course there are businesses involved, of course there are economic realities involved, but actually the challenges we're facing when it comes to the biosphere are a compound result of all the decisions that we as individuals and as neighbourhoods and as societies make on a day-to-day basis about how we live. And that can feel like a horrible web of difficult confusingness, but it's also, I think, the way to think about how you take it piece by piece and how we address these challenges. Jonathan showed this slide earlier as well. Well, that's me, aged about 7. I think I just cut my own fringe. I was actually born in Brighton and lived in Lewes till I was 9. And then my family moved just the other side of Uckfield to a place called Wilderness Wood. And in some ways, I was very lucky, because I had a 64-acre playground. I came home from school, had biscuit, and then basically I was off till I next got hungry. And I suppose I felt the natural world before I learnt about it. So for me, the idea that you need to look after and support the natural world that you rely on was just a no-brainer. I didn't need it explained to me. I just had felt it from a very young age. So it's something I learnt about afterwards, and all the principles of sustainability and so on. And I think for me, that personal, emotional, experience-based connection very much shaped my path, both personally and professionally. But there was another aspect to it, which was that I was a child of the 70s. So my parents were the ones living the good life well before it was fashionable. So, I was the child at Southover who, when she opened her lunchbox, had to hide the stone ground wholemeal organic sandwiches falling apart in their piece of recycled greaseproof paper and the russet windfall, and, aspired to wagon wheels and salt and vinegar crisps. We didn't have a TV. I siphoned off my lunch money to buy Vogue. And when I look back, I think that kind of inattention, that on the one hand, absolute respect and value of the natural world, no controversy for me there, and I wanted the good things in life. I'm not a pea on the compost heap person. I've got my daughter to do it occasionally. I want my cake and eat it, and I don't think I'm unusual in that. And so I think for me that's been my red thread, if you like, of wanting to find that balance, both for myself and for others, between protecting and supporting the natural world and enjoying a great life. And I think, we're not all going to live in a 64-acre wood, and most people don't want to live off-grid. And if we have a hope in hell of addressing the environmental and social challenges that we face today, we have to find ways to support as many people as possible to live a great life, that it is within planetary boundaries. We have to make this stuff mainstream. So that, if you like, is what gets me up in the morning. So I met Jonathan Smales, who is the co-founder of Human Nature, shortly after I graduated, and we worked together, and we set up a company called Beyond Green. So this was in 2001, and sustainability was still quite unusual then. So we had a whole portfolio of projects working for city leaders on their climate strategies, working for fast-moving consumer goods companies, thinking about how they engage with consumers, writing books, doing TV programs. And actually, there was one thing that held all these projects together, and it was very simple. It was just this question of, how shall we live? So if I am the managing director of a big consumer goods company, if I am the leader of a British city, if I am a householder wondering, how to feed my kids, a lot of the decisions that we make, we don't actually consciously think about. And actually, this is where we live and how we live has impact on whether life is better for us and whether life is better for the planet. In 2013, I was invited to join Ikea as head of sustainability. And that was a bit of a left curve for me. I wasn't expecting that. And I thought I'd help them find someone. And then I started talking to them, and I was like, you know what? What we need is agency for change, big change on this stuff. And that's what I wanted to do. And I realized that actually a big company like Ikea were and could be change agents. So in my own kind of upbringing, and then in those early years of working in lots of different sectors, lots of different projects, there were some themes that kept coming through. And there were some common themes around mainstreaming sustainability. Very obvious stuff. You've got to make it relevant. You've got to make it attractive. You've got to make it accessible. That includes affordable. And I also learnt, thinking back from my own upbringing and then working in lots and lots of different sectors, that the power of actually experiencing something for yourself and experiencing a real example of it is one of the most powerful change agents. And Ikea actually wasn't set up 75 years ago to sell furniture, cushions, billy bookcases. Its mission was to create a better everyday life for the many people. And so its real focus was shaping how people live. So I began a 7-year adventure at Ikea, doing lots of exciting things. First in the UK as head of sustainability, and then in Sweden as global head of healthy and sustainable living. And I moved back to the UK, skidded in about 36 hours before lockdown last March. And yeah, creating a better everyday life for the many people was the founding mission 75 years ago. And then when we were thinking about the strategy to take us to 2030, it was like, well, for life to be better, and the reason I'm telling you this story is that I think that these principles are the same as the ones we're sitting with here today. For life to be better in the 21st century, you have to make it better for the resources, the planet that you rely on. And so my goal, my KPI, my key performance indicator in all my performance talks was to inspire and enable 1 billion people to live a better life within the limits of the planet. That's the goal that I and my colleagues set for Ikea. Big one, still on a journey there. And we did lots of things towards that. One of them was actually a project that's still running in the UK called Live Lagom, working with thousands now of households to actually not think we are going to give you the answer because we're a big, clever corporate and we've got some clever guys in a forest in Sweden who've been thinking about this stuff all their lives, but to say, well, actually, how do you live right now? And what are the things that are most important to you in life that you're really motivated by? And how can we help you to achieve what's a better life for you within One Planet limits? And what kinds of products, services, information, engagement might you need? So again, that was for me a very formative learning process together. And then we applied these principles in lots and lots of different ways in the business, partly the products that we were designing for people, but also things like new services. So the circular take-back, rental of furniture, that sort of thing, new types of food, introducing veggie balls, introducing new products and services like selling home energy. So that was my Ikea journey, and that took me to last year. Moved back to the UK and plugged back in with Jonathan. So we basically evolved the Beyond Green into human nature. In Beyond Green, we've been very broad. We'd looked at where we live and how we'd live, and we'd tried to do it for other people, which is bloody frustrating, because you can do the most fantastic strategy and action plan and so on, and you might get paid for that piece of work, but you have no control over whether it actually gets delivered. And we are outcomes oriented, which is why we've decided we need to do it for ourselves. And this quote, I think, from Winston Churchill that Jonathan mentioned is very important in thinking, okay, well, how do you take that mindset and apply it to places? What's the connection there? And I think that in Ikea, they were great at actually making that connection between the way that your home is designed and run actually has a huge impact on your quality of life and your behavior within it. So actually, it's extraordinary. And I didn't know this until I lived there. But in Sweden, for a couple of generations now, they've really studied the connection between the way that your home is designed and the way that you end up using it and behaving. And so, for example, things like, the advent of the fitted kitchen came largely from that thinking. So after the war, they were looking at how they might support women to have more time to do other things like work. And actually, the way that you design a kitchen to be more efficient in its layout and so on, so you don't spend your entire friggin' time cooking and cleaning and washing up and doing the laundry, empowers you to do other stuff. So they boiled it down to a science. So Scandinavians, and Ikea within that, are very, very good at recognizing that relationship between your physical surroundings and your everyday behavior and the quality of life it gives you. So a lot of the work that I was doing with colleagues at IKEA was then, leaning into that to say, okay, well, how can we, in the way that the home is designed and the products and services within it, help people to live more sustainably? But the challenge is, of course, that there's only so much you can do under those four walls of your home. So much of our everyday life is lived outside the home, and so much of our behavior is determined by the infrastructure around us, the services that are there, that aren't there, and so on. And so you can see that actually place, as in, yes, your home, but also your street, your neighbourhood, and the wider location, can be a real enabler of sustainable living. They can also be a real disabler of sustainable living. They can empower you or they can disempower you. And coming back to the UK, having lived in Sweden for a while, and I have to learn not to compare everything with Sweden because people want to shoot me, but you really realise that actually in the UK, so much of the way our places are designed actually disempowers us from living sustainably. And so it's this connection that at Human Nature we're trying to, I suppose, make better. And in this project, we're trying to make better. So, for the Phoenix Project, how actually might we inspire and enable people to live better life within the limits of the planet? I'm going to rattle through a few examples of this, because this is the thinking that's woven into a lot of the designs and plans that are currently in process. Well, within the limits of the planet is a tricky one to pin down. But I know this is Lewis, so you know all this stuff anyway, so I'm not going to bother laboring it too much. But of course, if we think about our carbon footprint, that's a good proxy indicator of our total lifestyle impact. And actually, if you look at all the different components of individuals' everyday life in a Western country like the UK, the three big main contributors are the energy we use and consumption, so the stuff that passes through our hands on a day-to-day basis, the way we get around, and what we eat. Those are the three big moves. Each of those more or less adds up to around just under a third of your carbon impact. So if we're thinking about planetary limits, certainly at the individual, the household, at the neighbourhood level, those are really good things to focus on. Of course, that's the health of the planet, but for life to be better, it's got to be better for you as well as an individual. So health and well-being, in the roundest sense, we have to factor in as well. And then, of course, as I said before, this has got to be relevant to you and your current circumstances. It's got to be attractive. I don't want to live in a cave with the TV switched off. And it's got to be accessible. It's got to be easy to do. Whether that means affordable, whether it means quick, whether it means easy. So, those are four themes that I'm going to talk about briefly in our thinking for here at the Phoenix. Energy consumption, mobility, food, health and well-being. Too many words here. I will get some more pictures in my next version of this. So, when it comes to energy and consumption, the big moves are helping people to need to use less energy on a day-to-day basis. And so that is a really important factor in the design of all the buildings. Firstly, making sure that they've got a really low embodied energy in the building itself, and then designing in all sorts of energy efficiency measures, triple glazing, passive ventilation, that sort of thing. And also designing them so that they're adaptable for lots of different uses as your lifestyle changes, as your family grows, as your family shrinks. that means that you could use less energy than needing to kind of rebuild, and also take apart and reuse the different components of the building when it needs a new life. And then clean energy production. So later this afternoon, we'll have a whole section on this with Patrick Bellew, who is our lead engineer on this topic, and I'll be talking with him, so come back if you want the technical details. But in essence, what he and his team are doing is they're putting together a whole energy strategy for the site. And again, that's one of the things that's exciting. When you've got 16, 17 acres like we have here, you can start to do things in a much more joined up way than if you're kind of trying to either do it at the individual household level or retrofit it on afterwards. So looking at the whole system, it's how can we create a joined up grid so that we can look at the total demand and use it where it's best needed. The plans are that we will have some form of off-site solar energy production brought into site, a grid so that it can be used most effectively where and when it's needed, storage, battery storage, again, so that we can capture it for when it's needed, and so on. He can talk to you much more about that. But it is very exciting and quite groundbreaking, certainly in the UK. And then sort of smaller features on the buildings, things like shutters, actually. It doesn't all need to be high-tech. You know, I heard this really nice quote recently. When we think about climate adaptation, we don't necessarily need new, we need it now. So, you know, some of this will be new technology, but some of it will just be applying what we already know works really well elsewhere. So passive solar gain, but also things like shutters so that people can adapt the temperature of their home easily on a big scale. And then things like really planning in building maintenance and repairs so that there is a service so that when you move here, you can actually be supported to upgrade your home to be more energy efficient as and when you have different needs or as and when new technologies come online. So the idea of a community concierge who will support you not just in your energy use, but also in your everyday needs to live more sustainably. Again, this is such a low-tech thing, but you know, when you buy a pair of trainers, very often you get more information about those trainers than you do when you buy a house. And the idea here is that kind of during the design phase of the homes, when you move in and during those lives, you are given information so that you're supported to understand how your home operates, but also how to kind of operate it and keep it well monitored. But things like actually, you'll see in the exhibition, there's a lot of talk about compact living, shared living, co-housing, co-living. And this is for a number of reasons. To make any city centre site affordable, particularly one in the southeast of England, you need to have a decent density of homes. It also makes the use of the land much more efficient. It gives you more it means that you have a higher volume of people, a higher critical mass, so that actually it makes sense to have the products and the services nearby. But actually things like shared living, co-housing and co-living, more in the exhibition, but this, for example, is the idea that you might have some apartments that have some common areas. This is how I lived in Sweden. We had a very beautiful apartment around a courtyard, and in the courtyard there was a beautifully designed and well-maintained laundry, so that not every apartment had their own washing machine and their own tumble dryer and then which most of us don't use every day, and certainly not every hour of every day. You have one. So we had 17 apartments in our building. And then you use that on a rota. You have much better kit, much more efficient, got it all done at once, much more affordable, much more energy efficient. So that sort of thing helps make every household much more energy efficient and also much more resource efficient, and it's cheaper to run. And then thinking about services for upcycling and repair. So we're talking, I mean, Lewis already has a library of things that maybe some of you use. Things like repair cafes, tool libraries. I mean, there are bonkers statistics on, the number of minutes the average power drill is used per year in the UK. Most households do not need to own their own power drill, or hedge trimmer, or even lawnmower. If we had someone, within the neighbourhood who had some state-of-the-art kit like that they maintained it, and they could afford to pay for the really decent stuff up front, then I can use it for 4 minutes a year. That means that my energy use and my materials consumption is going to go right down, and it's going to be very affordable. Now this is Patrick's very clever energy strategy, which he will talk through later. But in essence, I mean, you get the idea that you've got your off-site PV, your battery storage, rainwater storage, all joined in with your waste system as well. I'm not going to go into that right now. And co-housing, of course, doesn't just have benefits, or co-housing, shared spaces, shared amenities. You don't just have the environmental benefits of that, you have the social benefits as well. Here's just a few examples of coming into this idea both of reducing waste and circularity, shared facilities. This is in Zurich. Something like 40% of new housing now being built in Zurich is shared living. I lived in Zurich for a while. It's full of bankers. This is aspirational. This is, people who have pretty much full choice of where and how they live, seeing the social, environmental, and economic benefits of being able to come together some of the time to use facilities together. So the second theme, mobility. I mean, mobility is great. It's the stuff of life. It enables us, moving on a day-to-day basis in our, just getting around, getting to see people. It's the essence of society. It's not a bad thing, but we do need to do it in a smarter way. It's something like 26%, 28% of UK carbon emissions are from transport. So it's not all about car or not car, and I think it often gets put into that, but cars actually are responsible for about 18% of UK emissions. So they are a big part of the challenge. And the way that we use them isn't always perhaps the smartest. 60% of journeys under 2 miles in the UK are by car. And EVs are obviously a bit better than petrol or diesel, but not much better. And just in terms of the cost of the way that we focus on cars to get around in the UK, yes, it's got environmental problems, but it's also not very efficient. There are 39 million cars in the UK, and they're parked over 96% of the time. So they're only used for 3.5% of the time. And the average car costs over £3,000 a year to run. £3,000. That's £284 a month, £66 per week. I mean, it's tricky for me to get my head around because I'm 47 and I don't have a driving license. And I just look around at all you lot and I'm like, oh my God, how do you afford it? That's never been in my kind of grown-up budget. So that's a really big stranded asset. So, putting climate aside, if we're thinking about affordability and we're thinking about, personal and collective economic impacts, designing a place where you don't have to have a car and you don't have to own a car and you don't have to use it every day, it might have some upsides. And then health, 1 in 6 deaths in the UK from inactivity. That's the same as smoking. Costing the, I think the aggregated costs of inactivity to the NHS is something like £1 billion a year. This is, so if we can think about how we can create a place that supports people to get where they need to, when they want, in a way that, yeah, of course, we all use cars sometimes, but you don't have to, that there are other options. It's going to be good for climate, it's going to be good for our economy, and it's going to be good for our health. So in practice, what will this mean? Designing a neighbourhood so that your really everyday activities, you can reach them from your front door by foot within 3 minutes, things that you might want to do every few days by 5 minutes, and then, we're 10-minute walk from the train station here. Of course, you can't do all those things, but, with that in mind, reducing the need to go far every day is the first step. Bike culture, the idea of having a hub, which is a building where we can have all the different forms of mobility together in one place. Brilliant, when you need a car, electric vehicles are better. We don't all need to own one. So sort of state-of-the-art EV car hire, car share. And also, Lewis is hilly. Electric bikes are great, but they can be expensive. Might not need to use one every day. It'd be great if we could share them, have some kind of club. And also, to make this really easy to access, there are already some great apps, and we're talking to some of the app developers and companies running this about how, if I want to go from A to B, it's going to be different every day. And it's a right old shag to find out, the different train timetables, bus timetables, which car club, this, that, and the other. Having it all in one app and putting that in everyone's hands makes it a lot easier. And then, having on-site repair and maintenance for all your vehicles. And then, both designing and having it as an outcome, safe and attractive streets. So that's the hierarchy, walking, 2 wheels, 4 electric wheels, and then public transport. Bike culture, so as I said, I lived in Sweden until last year. That's my daughter Malia. That was the electric bike that I got her to school on every day. And that is a typical winter street scene. In Scandinavia, actually, the weather's quite a lot worse than here. But if you design the place so that you can walk or cycle, then people do adapt. Low traffic streets, and the fantastic public realm that you can get with that. So you get it's really enjoyable to walk and cycle, but it's also very nice just a nice place to live. I am going to rattle through this really fast. So food, the idea of having a productive landscape with urban farming, growing plants on site, composting, making food waste reduction really easy, creating a local supply network of food, maybe even having a food box for residents and residents in the wider area, a canteen where we every day have affordable, locally sourced food. The idea with urban farming, sort of people think of as one block, with some cows or something in the middle of the town square. Actually, it's more about having a central facility that helps you as a resident or as a business to produce food around the site on a micro level that adds up to quite a large amount of food production. A plant nursery where plants and trees can be grown on site. Thinking about shared space again, thinking about balconies for food production and courtyards. And the idea is to have a hotel in the central square and to use the roof of that as a growing space to provide ingredients for restaurants on the site. And also thinking about collecting food waste. So I don't know whether any of you guys use the Lewis Compost Club already. So I am quite a compost geek. I love making compost, but it can be a bit smelly. And if you don't have your own garden, or if you've got a busy life, it can be a bit inconvenient. So what these guys do, this is already up and running, and they came to us to introduce themselves, is that they go around households, starting in Brighton, now in Lewis, collecting your compost. They bring it to a central facility where they can compost at scale. It's just behind the buildings on site here already now. And then, as a Compost Club member, you then get some compost back if you want it to use in your own garden. That sort of thing. Just, using the power of the neighbourhoods to make it happen. Health, well-being, and quality of life. So super green is not just good for biodiversity, not just good for climate. It's also very good, obviously, for our physical and mental well-being, and that's being built in as a theme into all the designs. Hopefully, you'll pick that up in the exhibition, and then designing a place that enables you to be active on an everyday basis. When I moved to Sweden, I joined a gym because I had been living in London for 18 years, and I don't spend money on a car, I always spent money on gym membership. So, one of the first things I did was sign up for a gym. I was there for 3 years, and I think I used it twice, because I was cycling Monday to Friday about 160 miles, just taking my daughter to school and getting to work. And then more. I never went on a bike ride. I didn't go on a bike ride in 3 years, as in, I'm going to put my Lycra on, and today's activity is going for a bike ride. It was just part of my walking and cycling, was just how I did stuff, and I've never been fitter. So, sport, play, recreation throughout the site, as well as making it easy to walk and cycle. We are talking with the local GPs to look at creating a new health hub for Lewes, which will include the GP surgeries, but also associated health and well-being practices. So it's not just about sickness service, it's a health service. And we have plans for the soap factory that we're now sitting in, to create a family activity and wellbeing centre. So this is the idea of, I'm a parent of a young child, and particularly when the weather's bad, having somewhere that you can come and do climbing and other fun, active sports under one roof, maybe with other things that I might enjoy, like yoga, Soulfit next door, giving us a taste of that. It is something that we're already looking to in a lot of detail. So there, you've just got some lovely pictures. So yeah, that's the idea. We do need to change the world. We can't do the whole thing. Let's take it one neighbourhood at a time. There's Malia. Thank you. We have the GP sort of aggregated service, the Foundry. And they would like to have a new facility and a new location where they can bring together all their services under one roof, because it's quite scattered at the moment. So we're in active discussions. They've approached us and said they'd like to be located on the site. So we're working with them to explore what would that look like in practice, and how can we actually design together something that's really fit for purpose, rather than kind of wedging a GP surgery into something that was once a house. It will be in this corner of the site. So it will be, if you like, the corner that's most connected with the centre of town, for obvious reasons. So accessible to the rest of the town on foot or bike, and for those who need to drive, if you're not well, you might need to drive or be dropped off, very accessible. And yeah, so that it would have all your usual GP facilities, plus things like physiotherapy, osteopathy, and so on under one roof. In terms of timings, it's clearly a priority. We've had some questions generally about phasing of the site. Obviously, this is a big site, you don't build it all at once, but you want it to have core services and facilities from day one, so that the first residents benefit. So my understanding was this is one of the first buildings that would be complete. That's obviously partly contingent on how fast the planning process is. But yeah, that's in essence, we're working absolutely hand in hand with the Foundry and other providers around to provide a joined up service. It would be a building that's designed with them, so it's got the service in mind. Corner of the site, most close to central Lewes, and in one of the first phases, very early on in the phasing. Yeah. So timing, it's a big project, and it's a lot more complex than your average house building project, which does make it take longer. And it's one of the reasons that we're trying to go into as much detail pre-plan. This is already much, much more detailed than your usual outline planning application, because we want to, when it does go into the planning process, kind of have explored as many of the questions as possible to help move it along. My understanding is that the current schedule is that we hope to make a planning application late spring 2022. And after that, there are, a lot of factors outside our control in terms of how quickly the planning process kind of accepts it, how many times we have to go back and do more detail. And again, that's one of the reasons that we're trying to do as much consultation with the different planning authorities as well as with the community beforehand as possible, so that we've got as much evidence and, we've together looked at some of the... and it will be phased. One of the interesting things is that we are quite often in the discussions the ones pushing the planners to fulfill their, on climate and things like that, their strategy goals. And that's one of the challenges, because, we have, in this country now, we have bold targets around climate and things like that, but we don't have much good practice yet. So we're having as many conversations as we can. Yes, of course. I mean, it's a fantastic site, both in terms of history and heritage, but also in terms of the built infrastructure that's here. We want to, both for cultural and historic reasons, but also for climate and resource reasons, use as much as we can of what's here. Unfortunately, many aspects of the site, have been in disrepair for a long time. So we're doing a lot of work on, what we can repair now to make good and keep. So we will use as many of the buildings as we can. And then for the bits that we can't, we have a wonderful engineer who uses this phrase, mining the Anthropocene. So in other words, using as much as you can of the kind of human-created materials as possible. So the things that the buildings we can't use, we will repurpose. An absolute need, both in terms of making sure that the space we have for homes is used as efficiently as possible, and that the issue of loneliness and isolation is addressed and not exacerbated. So, I mean, we talk about a place to start and a place to stay. I think a good neighbourhood is one where you have people at all stages of their lives, and where you ideally, you might move away for a bit, you might come back, but you can put down roots and keep them. We are, in the designs, we are very consciously trying to address, a really broad demographic, and particularly different life stages. And we're in lots of conversations with people, sort of thinking about maybe the later third of life and what that needs. So yes, maybe smaller homes, maybe homes with accessibility as a particular focus, but also the idea of shared living or some shared facilities. I think having a community building can be a very good thing, but I think very often that's I don't want you to be rude, but in many places it's a sticking plaster. Because you're not designing social interaction into the way the streets are designed, into the way the squares are designed, into the way that you have different types of people living different parts of their day-to-day life, alongside each other. So, I mean, as an example, we've had 7, I think, co-housing groups approach us about the idea of designing blocks with this co-housing idea in mind, so that people have, you have your apartment or your home where you have your privacy and so on, but you also have shared facilities, and that might be for economic reasons and efficiency reasons, but it's also for social reasons. And 2 examples of that. One is my stepson, who is 32 and has recently had a baby. And he's working abroad at the moment, and he and his, I would say, cohort, young professionals, doing great jobs, working in developments and so on, but they're never going to have a hope in hell of moving back to London and owning anything, but they want to, on their budget, be able to have a nice home for their family, but also have people who they can interact with on a day-to-day basis. So they're saying, can we have, like, you know, young families? Can we, you know, is there an area of the site where we can get those benefits? Also, another group is older ladies who have kind of come together as a group and said, well, we're probably going to outlive our husbands, or we're divorced, or, you know, we can see that they're going downhill fast. Shall we buy a house in the country together and live our later years there? Nice idea, but we might get on each other's tits. And, you know, as we get older, we're going to be isolated and not have, you know, can we have a place where we can, you know, live our everyday lives, have our own spaces, but also have shared facilities, right through to thinking about, you know, sheltered or serviced late life accommodation co-located with a nursery. So there's lots, you know, I don't think there's one answer, but I think the idea of social connection is incredibly important, both in the housing provision, but also in the way the places and the services are designed. Thank you.